the foundation of the Constitution. That's how Thomas Jefferson described the 10th Amendment. Not an add-on, not an afterthought, the entire point. Yet, ask the average American what it says or means, and you'll get mostly blank stares. Ask the government, and they usually pretend it doesn't even exist. But the founders and old revolutionaries, they didn't secede from an empire over taxes or tea. They fought a long, bloody war to free themselves from unlimited, centralized power in all cases whatsoever. The 10th Amendment was their answer. Power is never supposed to be assumed. It must be delegated, and it comes from we the people of the several states. So on this episode, I'll share this forgotten foundation from revolution to ratification and what it all tells us about how to turn things around today. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, July 30th, 2025. Now, in order to understand the foundation of the Constitution, you first have to understand what the founders and the old revolutionaries, what they seceded from, what James Madison later called the fundamental principle on which our independence itself was declared. Madison was talking about a fatal mistake made by the British Parliament in 1766 when they passed the Declaratory Act. These were a series of just short words that really sparked a revolution and brought down the empire. Again, the Declaratory Act was in response to the people's nullification of the Stamp Act. Sure, they repealed the Stamp Act, but they wanted to really claim that they still had power in all cases whatsoever. Now, before the British decided to claim that unlimited power, this is how the unwritten Constitution worked in the British system. Here from my new article over at the New American Magazine. For over a century, the system worked. Colonial legislatures governed local affairs. Parliament managed external issues such as foreign trade and war. Each stayed in its own lane, and none claimed the other's turf. Now, if that constitutional structure sounds familiar, well, it really should, because Madison understood that Parliament and the colonial legislatures were just equals. They weren't superior or subordinates as long as they were acting within their own spheres. They just had different jurisdictions. Here's how he described it. The fundamental principle of the revolution was that the colonies were coordinate members with each other and with Great Britain. The legislative power, he wrote, was maintained to be as complete in each American parliament as in the British Parliament. So again, as long as they were acting within their own sphere, then their power was complete. It couldn't be basically invaded by the other. But as we all know, that system didn't last forever, because when Parliament destroyed this unwritten constitutional balance, when it invaded the colonial sphere with internal taxes and regulations, well, they ran into other problems. And this is how I put it in my article. The colonists understood the real fight wasn't over stamps, standing armies, taxation, or tea. All of those were, as John Hancock explained, mere symptoms of the deadly disease, examples of how the British, quote, exercised this pretended right. That's how John Hancock put it, describing the unlimited power of the Declaratory Act of 1766. Now, in the depths of winter in December of 1776, Thomas Paine urged the people to fight on, even against all odds, because reconciliation against that type of a system was impossible. And here's how he put it in the American Crisis #1. You're probably familiar with the phrase, "These are the times that try men's souls." That's how he kicked it off. But he also discussed the Declaratory Act. He said, Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. And Paine continued, and if being bound in that manner is not slavery, then there is not such a thing as slavery upon earth. Even the expression is impious, for so unlimited a power can belong only to God. And this created a serious clash, and as James Madison explained, by claiming everything, the British quickly learned, well, over a number of very difficult years, that they ended up with nothing. He said the assertion by Great Britain of a power to make laws for the other members of the empire in all cases whatsoever ended in the discovery that she had a right to make laws for them in no cases whatsoever. And Madison described this clash, this fundamental clash about the limits of power, the basis of our Republican constitutions. This was the foundation, this structure of unlimited power against the British, instead of the unwritten system where they handled kind of the foreign things, war and external trade and regulations, and everything else was decided by the colonial legislatures. The American Revolution, it wasn't about tea or taxes. Those were mere symptoms of the underlying disease. It was about power. And when the founders came up with a solution for this, their solution was something that had never been done before. St. George Tucker described it like this in view of the Constitution of the United States. He said, "The American Revolution seems to have given birth to this new political phenomenon. In every state, a written constitution was framed and adopted by the people, both in their individual and sovereign capacity and character. And these written constitutions, they established the hierarchy in the American system. People on top, government on bottom." This is how Tucker described it. By this means, the just distinction between the sovereignty and the government was rendered familiar to every intelligent mind. The former was found to reside in the people and to be unalienable from them. The latter in their servants and agents. So government, under the American constitutions, is nothing more than a servant and agent. Well, at least that's how it's supposed to be. But anyways, Tucker continued, "By this means also, government was reduced to its elements. Its object was defined, its principles ascertained, its powers limited and fixed." And we can see this very clearly in the first Constitution for these United States, that is, the Articles of Confederation. Article 2 spelled it out very, very clearly. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. Now, if we fast forward to the ratification debates over the Constitution, James Madison explained that the Constitution would follow this same principle. The federal government would have a very clearly spelled out list of jobs, very narrow as well, and everything else would be reserved to the states. Pretty straightforward stuff. Here he is in Federalist number 45. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. Now, remember how Madison described the British system before things went off the rails? Well, he used almost the exact same words to describe how things would function under the Constitution for the United States. The external stuff would be the purview of the federal government, and everything else would be reserved to the states. He wrote, "The former will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, with which last the power of taxation will, for the most part, be connected. The powers," he said, "reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects, which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. But the anti-federalists were not buying this description. Almost all the Federalists were repeating this over and over and over. Hey, we've planned out this document. We've written out a bunch of things that are delegated to the federal government. And because we, the people of the several states, well, we're sovereign, government is just an agent and a servant, we're just spelling out what they're authorized to do. Anything that we haven't spelled out that they're authorized to do, they're not authorized to do it. But again, anti-federalists weren't buying it. There was no express reservation of power. It wasn't included in the document that came out of the Philadelphia Convention. So by the time the Virginia Ratifying Convention, for example, came up, Patrick Henry pointed out, well, hey, if we don't spell it out, here's a reminder of how that went down with the British. He said, how were the congressional rights defined when the people of America, united by a confederacy to defend their liberties and rights against the tyrannical attempts of Great Britain? The states, he said, were not then contented with implied reservation. So unless you spell it out, it's implied that what you're telling us is true. It even went to the point of saying, in the past, it's always been the opposite. So why is it not there? Why do we not have this included? He drove the point home by pointing out that the Articles of Confederation said it in black and white, and the Constitution said nothing. He said, no, Mr. Chairman, it was expressly declared in our Confederation that every right was retained by the states respectively, which was not given up to the government of the United States. But there is no such thing here. And because of this contentious debate over delegated and reserved powers, the Constitution almost failed ratification. I'll get to that in just a moment, but I first want to point out that while I realize I'm going through a lot of important historical information here pretty quickly, it's my hope that this episode serves as a bit of a highlight reel for you and encourages you to read and learn more in context on your own time. And if you're that type of person, you're in luck because the TAC's got your back. Every single episode, we publish a blog post over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty for that episode. Alan Mosley does an awesome job very consistently getting those blog posts organized. And at the top of it, beyond the title and all that, you're going to find the overview of audio player plus the video player. But below that is the important thing I'm trying to get to is a show links section. And as long as I did a good job with my notes here that I'm going to pass along to Alan after the show's done, as long as I did a good job with that, then, well, those reference links will be in the show links section, generally in the order that I covered it in the episode. Again, Alan will get that organized, and I will get it published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. It's all spelled out a couple of hours after the live stream is done. Now, this express reservation of power from the Articles of Confederation that the Anti-Federalists, I just cited Patrick Henry, but others talked about this as well. For example, Federal Farmer. That missing piece by January of 1788. Remember, Constitution Day, the end of the Philadelphia Convention, was September 17th, 1787. And, the ratification debates really weren't, there weren't a ton of them before January of 1788. There were some. But the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention, that's the moment where it was make or break for the Constitution. And this issue was really number one on the list. Hear from Pauline Mayer's great book, Ratification, The People Debate the Constitution. She put it like this. The Massachusetts Ratifying Convention was the first to meet in a state where there was significant opposition to the Constitution. And what would happen if Massachusetts failed to ratify or refused to do so? She said other states, particularly New Hampshire and New York, would probably follow her example. Everyone understood that if Massachusetts didn't ratify, then, well, there would be another domino that fell. They would not get the full ratification that they want. And she continued, that would all but seal the Constitution's fate. It was going to lose, since Rhode Island, and now perhaps also Virginia, were likely to vote no. And around halfway through that ratification convention in Massachusetts, again, it started in early January 1788. By around, I think it was January 22nd, they were doing some head counts about who was in favor, who was against. And from what I've read, by the 22nd, so about 2 weeks in, it was 144 in favor, 192 against. It was clearly getting crushed. And the very next day, Rufus King wrote to James Madison saying, well, things aren't looking good here at all. He said, our prospects are gloomy, but hope is not entirely extinguished. They decided to work on a strategy. He said, we are now thinking of amendments to be submitted, not as a condition of our assent and ratification, but as the opinion of the convention subjoined to their ratification. So the plan became strategic. They had to come up with a way to get some of the people on the margins to say, okay, well, we like the plan, but we don't like it as it now stands. So there are various kind of categories of anti-federalists. The vast majority of them were not of the mentality that they were going to reject it no matter what. They loved the Articles of Confederation. The vast majority, even on the anti-federalist side, were on board with revising the Articles of Confederation or even going with the Constitution that was being proposed, but now not, and the phrase was regularly used, as it now stands. They wanted to see significant amendments to it. And that's exactly what they did in Massachusetts. John Hancock and Samuel Adams, who were both probably opposed but they were quiet about it. They were both not in favor of what they saw. Well, they decided to make a deal with the Federalists, Rufus King, Theophilus Parsons, and a few others. We're going to support ratification as long as we can include recommended amendments. That was the deal. And first, number one on that list was a reiteration of what was in Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation, a precursor to what became the 10th Amendment. First, that it be explicitly declared that all powers not expressly delegated by the aforesaid Constitution are reserved to the several states to be by them exercised. And with that, it passed. The vote was 187 to 168. So it was still pretty close. And Thomas Jefferson was actually a big fan of the strategy. He wrote about this a number of times from France to various people that he was corresponding with during the ratification debates. Here's a letter to Edward Carrington. He said, my first wish was that 9 states would adopt it in order to ensure what was good in it, and that the others might, by holding off, produce the necessary amendments. So he even was of the mind that he liked a lot of the stuff that was in it, but Jefferson really wanted 2 primary amendments, and one of them was what he called a Bill of Rights. But really what he was saying, he wanted a kind of delegated reserve line in the sand. He said the First Amendment proposed by Massachusetts will in some degree answer this end. So he's basically saying that first proposal, that carryover from the Articles of Confederation, that precursor to the 10th Amendment, was really his first choice on that list. So again, his first wanted to see 9 states ratify so it would go into effect and have the other 4 voted down, and that would create an environment strategically where they could get these amendments introduced. But he said, the plan of Massachusetts is far preferable and will, I hope, be followed by those who are yet to decide. And again, that set the stage. Jefferson's voice probably got around and helped push this forward as well, because South Carolina, New Hampshire, Virginia, and New York all followed suit with very similar recommended amendments. A couple of them actually copied it almost verbatim, similar recommended amendments. And when you connect all the dots from the Revolution to ratification, it's pretty easy to see why Thomas Jefferson then considered the 10th Amendment the foundation to the entire system. Here he is, 10 months. This is after the Constitution went into effect. And then in 1791, 10 months to the day before the Bill of Rights was ratified. He said, I consider the foundation of the Constitution as laid on this ground, that all powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people. But this foundation wasn't just about creating a dividing line between the powers of various governments, between federal and state power, or how most people today define states' rights. It was about something much deeper, something much more important. Samuel Adams described it like this to Richard Henry Lee. He said, "I mean, my friend, to let you know how deeply I am impressed with a sense of the importance of amendments, that the good people may clearly see the distinction, for there is a distinction between the federal powers vested in Congress and the sovereign authority belonging to the several states, which is the palladium of the private and personal rights of the citizens." And some years later, John Taylor of Caroline described it the same way. The dividing line, the line in the sand between federal and state power, that's the foundation, the basis for the preservation of liberty. He said the preservation of liberty must depend on the division of power between the state and federal governments, or an accurate distinction between the powers bestowed and reserved. Why? Because anything else would lead to arbitrary power, usurpation of power, and consolidation or centralization of power. The same kind of stuff that they fought a long, bloody war to secede from, to free themselves from. And in a letter to Elbridge Gerry, that's how Samuel Adams described it. He said, "Without such distinction, there will be danger of the Constitution issuing imperceptibly and gradually into a consolidated government over all the states." He said, "The people of the United States, being in different climates, of different education and manners, and possessed of different habits and feelings under one consolidated government, cannot long remain free, or indeed under any kind of government but despotism." But here's the caveat. Merely putting it on paper, no matter how awesome those words you put on paper, it's not enough. It doesn't do anything. Words on paper don't enforce themselves. They never did, and they never will. And John Dickinson understood, well, of course you want to have a better constitution rather than a worse constitution. It should be more clearly limiting the government's power rather than being super vague, of course. And Dickinson, being the lead kind of author, I often call him the father of the Articles of Confederation, also a prominent supporter of ratification some years later. He put it like this: "A good constitution promotes, but not always produces, a good administration." And that leads us to the essential point. The entire structure, this entire foundation, was designed to protect individual liberty, individual rights. And why? Or how? By preventing consolidation and arbitrary power, by making it very clear what power was delegated and reserved. But this additional piece of the puzzle is really the most important piece, and that is the piece that's almost totally forgotten and ignored today, and that is who is in charge. John Jay, who later became the first Chief Justice, put it like this: "The Constitution only serves to point out that part of the people's business which they think proper by it to refer to the management of the persons therein designated." He had a way with words, John Jay. He said those persons are to receive that business to manage not for themselves and as their own, but as agents and overseers for the people to whom they are constantly responsible, and by whom only they are to be appointed. And most people today have no clue what any of that means, but I think James Wilson summed it up best. He said, "As our constitutions are superior to our legislatures, so the people are superior to our constitutions." That's the pecking order. People, then below people, is the constitution that the people have created for their legislatures or governments. And he said, indeed, the superiority in this last instance is much greater, for the people possess over our constitutions control in act as well as in right. We see that structure, that hierarchy spelled out in the text of the 10th Amendment itself, ratified December 15th, 1791. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. The entire American system is based on that foundation. It's not the Constitution that protects the people. It's the people that protect and defend their own Constitution and their own liberty, whether the government happens to like it or not. John Hancock was right. The powers reserved by the people render them secure. They just need to use them. Of course, the people can never use what they don't even know they have. And unfortunately, the government-run and government-approved so-called education system never teaches any of this stuff. And that's a huge part of the reason why we work so hard every single day to reach and teach more and more people about these essential foundational principles from the founders, the old revolutionaries, and of course the great thinkers that they read and learned from. And nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing, dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options as well. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Now, if you don't want to become a member but still want to help us out financially, that's awesome. Whatever works best for you works best for me. Or if you're already a member, first of all, thank you so much. And I know a number of people have always asked, hey, where can I pitch in a little additional? Well, however you want to do that, it's over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate if you want to make a one-time contribution, whether by a credit card using the dirty government fiat, or if you want to mail us a gold back or send us some Satoshis, whatever works, again, for you works great for me. I'm extremely grateful for any consideration you can give to putting your financial backing behind our work here at the TAC. Thank you so much. I won't continue to belabor that point. There are a bunch of other free and easy peasy things that you can do to help us spread the word, primarily by triggering algorithms of the platforms you may watch or listen on. So, for example, watch time percentage on YouTube is a huge thing. If it's a 10-minute video, which I know this is not, and you watch 10 minutes, that's 100%, pretty good. But if you watch 20, that's 200%, and it's super awesome. Also, reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, likes, subscribe, get notifications, comments in the archive, sharing links, all that stuff, again, will trigger the algorithms and help us reach more and more people. We're reaching way more people than I ever thought possible when I first founded the 10th Amendment Center back in 2006, but we're still scratching the surface. So I really appreciate your help. I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting, maybe a little entertaining here and there, but more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, I really appreciate you being here, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on the Path to Liberty.